Good morning again. While the machine is warming up, I'd like to not so much state an apology, but make a statement that I'm sitting on the desk rather than standing up, because if I do, I don't think any of you can see me. Even with a pedestal, this is slightly better. The other is simply that you had 2 days of, I think, PowerPoint presentations, one after another. So my guess is maybe about 600 slides would have been transmitted to you in one way or another, and there must be some kind of a fatigue. So why not test a situation where we will not be using PowerPoint? Now, this is not for any ideological reasons. Simply a funny thing happened to me at about 4:30 or 5 this morning. I suffered a cramp. This is a physical one. Now, if you get to be my stage chronologically, you're on to Plavix, Micardis, Crestor, what else? Genumet, Diabeta, the whole lot. And these things have strange effects besides easing your physiological difficulties. And cramps are one of those things that you suffer. And so I got up and I said, well, let me actually review what I'm going to say this morning and see, given that over the last 2 days, we have been filled with so much of knowledge and enrichment on open educational resources, the technological aspects of it. Should I also be saying the 1,001 things that the Asians are not doing and speak about something different? I opened up my PowerPoint slides, and lo and behold, all I could see was squares and dots. I said, is this a senior moment? Did I do something wrong? I tried and I tried again. No. The machine asked me, would you like to know the details? And I said, yeah. And it said something to do with the converter. It's corrupt or whatever. And I am not yesterday's speaker. I'm not Eric Duval. I know you can get onto the bike, but when you fall down, you've got to get back again with some assistance, certainly for me. Since he was not around, and I'm not him, the thing to do was, well, why not just talk to this morning, just have a conversation, rather than a presentation on the screen with another 30 or 40 slides. So do tolerate this particular shortcoming, and I seek your indulgence. I thought I'll speak about sustaining open educational resources, lessons from open distance education. And the reason for that, again, is that I am very much a person who has grown into distance education, open distance learning, and clearly open educational resources is a bit of a new thing. And to talk about Asia, because that's something that I'm now beginning to be a little bit familiar, not as familiar as I should be, but I'm certainly a little bit familiar. So colleagues, to begin with, many of you probably know that Asia is going through a period of unprecedented demand for higher levels of learning. Now, this demand started a few years ago, and it's expected to continue for a few years to come. Now, in 2007, when UNESCO's statistics were published, they spoke about an Asian situation where out of the 157 million participants in higher education, close to about 102 million are Asians today. Well, in 2007, 2010, these numbers probably have gone up. It is still not sufficient to satisfy the demand. The gap probably is huge. I think taking Asia overall, probably participation rate is around 10 or 11%, when Western economies, including some of the OECD members like Japan and Korea, are looking at 30, 40, and 50%. So the gap is huge, and it is expected to widen simply because Asia is getting, well, most of Asia is getting younger, really. Now, by 2025, global demand for higher education is expected to go to about 256 million if you accept statistics and projections. And just India and China alone will claim 107 million of that 200 and something, 56 million places. That's just two countries. In 2007, the 25 or 30 countries that make up Asia only use about 102 million places. Now, where is this demand going to be met? Certainly, private provision is being spoken as an option, and the other would be some alternate ways of applying other tools, and among the other tools to be applied would be distance education as a possible solution. Now, although there are about 50 to 60,000 institutions of higher education in Asia, it's 50 to 60,000. They're mostly conventional, face-to-face systems, and many are obsessively preoccupied with research and, more recently, world-class rankings. It's going to take them a long while to get anywhere in the top 200, but they are preoccupied with that. And my sense is this is to the detriment of perhaps innovations in pedagogy and even addressing broader access and equity issues. While they will gladly, these 50 or 60,000 institutions, or at least a good percentage of them, will collaborate on research, such collaborations rarely extend to curriculum and learning resources. Neither is there a serious desire or commitment to widening participation. Now, that is going to be a major challenge for the continent. How do you go about widening participation in a situation where the supply is so thin and the demand so huge? Either you have to be extremely bright to get into a university or extremely rich. Now, these institutions at this point are not making a commitment to providing alternate pathways for entry, and they are also not ready to share their content with others. Now, without probably some very difficult strictures. Now, the wider societal concerns of access, equity, facilitation to learning by non-formal cohorts, or sharing of course content is often left to distance education providers. Well, after spending some 30 years or so as a practitioner and advocate for open learning and distance education, especially in Asia and in the developing world, as a post-retirement activity, I recently started taking an interest in open educational resources at the invitation of the International Development Research Center, which has itself taken a renewed interest in open source. Therefore, the thoughts that I share with you are those of a neophyte on open educational resources, guided mostly by my earlier experience in open distance learning, as well as following a number of web-based discussions on the subject that is of tremendous interest to you. Now, this invitation to ICDE allows me to also bring to your attention some activities that are taking place around open educational resources in my part of the world, and maybe share thoughts with you and get the benefits of your wisdom, how much more we need to find out about the potential value of OERs in the Asian environment. Is OERs a singular term, or should I just, OER is a plural term as well? I suppose it is. So drop the S. In an Asian environment, the challenges that need to be met to make this a essential, a valuable tool in the provision of learning, and the kinds of investments that may be required to make it all sustaining. From a development perspective, for OER to succeed, certainly in emerging economies, a much broader nationwide strategic approach will have to be taken, I think, for it to impact on education and access to it. I think there is a case to be made here. Now, some 35 years ago, similar concerns about sustainability did preoccupy the minds of those who ventured into open distance learning. Now, that sustainability issue certainly influenced very much our thinking and our activities in terms of advocating, promoting, and developing open distance learning, especially in the higher education sector in Asia. As I was preparing for this particular conversation, again, the web search led me to, I think it's probably a couple of, or maybe more than a few years ago, a proposal that the Hewlett Foundation put together, a logic model, if some of you, I think most of you will know about it than I would, describing a rationale to developing a successful OER initiative or venture, which, as I'm sure you are aware of, I wish my corrupted PowerPoint is available so I could show that to you, but just think what it is if you know it already. I mean, it disposed for selves about needs and materials development and advocacy. Now, I'm not sure if the above premise is still valid in today's thinking around OE. The logic model proposed by Hewlett-Packard. But what I'm certain, just recollecting, the open distance learning community at that stage and subsequently almost intuitively had an analog version of that. Needs analysis, materials development, supporting and enhancing access and sustaining and continuing with that effort. Now, so in many ways, the models that we had embarked on, not with any prior experience, perhaps more intuitively than anything else, was very much similar. Now, the adherence to the simple logic helped enormously many of today's well-functioning open distance education systems in Asia. They are not only well-functioning, but sustaining themselves successfully over the years, over the last 30, even 40 years, and have emerged from being what was then a side stream activity in the higher education tech sector towards being a mainstream provision today. It is important for us at least to note and record that many of these systems in Asia, especially those in Indonesia, Thailand, Sri Lanka, India, and Malaysia, began ODL as a series of experimental and pilot studies. Very similar in many ways to the many projects that you're describing, before evolving themselves into comprehensive teaching institutions. These are systems that are resilient, regularly adapting themselves to the changing environment, whether it's social or technological. Now, the success of this, modest as it may be, of these open education institutions, the open universities, gives me a fool's confidence to put forward a thesis to you that one way an OER culture can take root, certainly in my immediate neighborhood geographic environment, as well as in many other transition economies, is making ODL institutions themselves to this latest innovation. Could OER sit comfortably in an open distance learning environment? It's a question that I think Asian open universities need to address. Now, there are a number of reasons why I take the courage to say this. First of all, these institutions have in place systems that facilitate greater interaction between learners and learners, something that the OER subscribes to. There is interaction between learners and mentors effectively, as well as learners and content. Besides, the institutions have a monopoly of conferring accredited credits and credentials. The range of experience and research results confirms that open distance education in the context of lifelong learning certainly has many inbuilt capacities. And such capacities also include reaching out to marginalized groups, reaching far to geographically isolated individuals, being very much learner-driven or learner-centric, allowing a person to decide when, how, where she wants to learn, as well as reaching out to nomadic tribes that are on the move all the time. They make their courses also perhaps surreptitiously available to others in the market and sometimes free to use at other times conditions apply. The potential of these various experiences, at least to me, demonstrates that there is value in building a much stronger synergy between the practice of distance education and the purpose behind open educational resources. This does not mean that I am treating ODL and OER as synonymous, but that simply saying that the latter, OER, has enormous value in further strengthening the value of the former open distance education. It is a great symbiote, as a biologist, I could say, a symbiotic relationship that should be nurtured. Over the last 20 years, there has been tremendous growth and diversity in Asian distance education. It is today home to well over 70 dedicated open universities. They are completely dedicated to providing open access to higher education. And some 9 of them are amongst the 13 mega universities, serving perhaps a total of 20 million active students. That's about today a fifth of higher education students in Asia, that 102 million that I spoke about a few minutes ago. Many more amongst the 70 are rapidly migrating to a status of the mega universities. Asia is not stuck with just the 70s experience of distance education. Besides those dedicated open universities, there are a few conventional universities, despite my earlier comment that they're not interested in widening participation, that are delivering learning to populations outside the confines of campuses. Now, there are also some new kinds of institutions. The rapid rollout of communication technologies with their enormous capacities, especially funded by governments, and the availability of a growing bandwidth has simply meant everybody is searching for and trying to find other purposes for these investments besides just simply entertainment and information or propaganda. Education is seen as one such purpose. and it also fits well within a culture that wishes to promote education for all, wishes to promote education just in time and anytime, anywhere, and making available courses 24/7. Now, all this have led to or resulted in a new form of provision for higher education, which many of you are so familiar with, the so-called virtual and cyber universities. South Korea has been leading the region in the creation of such institutions, perhaps with about 37 or so of them, and mostly they are private. Thailand, through its Commission on Higher Education, created a Thai Open University with public funding, but it is essentially a portal through which collaborating Thai universities share open courseware, and they also facilitate students to register, sit for exams, gain credits, and receive credits and credentials. They do facilitate transfer arrangements that allow learners to gain a degree from any one of the 27 participating institutions on satisfactory completion of graduation requirements of that institute or university. This is a radical move from traditional practice for Thailand as it is for many other Asian institutions. This unbundling of services, products, assessments, and certification through a government-supported and managed operation. In Malaysia, China, Pakistan, and the Philippines, similar attempts to create cyber institutions have been in the making and perhaps even attempted, but not in any way similar to the strategic direction and policy support as in South Korea or Thailand. In China, the government is encouraging universities to diversify their income sources, and one sees perhaps an active use of online platforms for such purposes. I think if it's done within a strategic framework, with governments acting as catalysts, not as controllers, such virtual universities can widen participation access, at least to those who are located in situations where they can access the technologies with better and improved IT infrastructure. The last mile is still a challenge for many Asian nations. So will it be available to rural populations, to nomadic populations? Very unlikely in the near future. So after almost 35 years of active use of open distance learning, I hope I'm not overstretching a point when I say that to a great extent, open distance learning has indeed become a mainstream provision for higher education. With about 20 million learners participating in these provisions, the value of these institutions, and more importantly, their sustainability seems to be assured. These institutions are equalizing access by reaching out and reaching far into their communities, providing flexible options to gain university credit. From 18-year-olds to 70-year-olds or maybe 80-year-olds are participating, and they have found channels both for enrichment and for qualifications. Together, all of these 70 universities are seen as responding to the aspiration of nations to create their own knowledge-based societies, allowing equity to happen in practice rather than in policy only. Now, the creation of open universities through the use of distance education and the application of ICTs to deliver learning in Asia, as it is universally, I describe the very positive things. Now, this has not been without its problems and its critics. I think perhaps it's worth talking a little bit about this here. Certainly, the question of quality concerns and continues to be a bugbear in distance education, especially if it is open. I think it's been bothering distance education in Asia, at least from the very beginning. It still continues to be a bother. Institutional leaders come under enormous pressure to do more, to do it fast, and to do it cheaply. Sometimes these three things do not quite gel together. There are other things as well that bothers quality, and these problems relate to policies, insufficient outreach, access to and the reliability of technologies, inefficiencies and ineffectiveness of administrative arrangements, and most importantly, there are questions about the actual or real cost of producing a graduate, given the high rates of attrition, non-completion, and the quality of those graduating. These are issues that have to be handled. Other critics have also questioned the quality of learners, the dumbing down of curriculum, commodification of education, validity of assessment systems, and the lack of a comprehensive support system that a campus education provides. Now, many of the problems are certainly real in some occasions or some situations, but equally, many of the criticisms may be unfounded and perhaps reflect fears or prejudices. It would not be incorrect to say that Asia is not a homogeneous entity in any sense of the word. So not all of the problems that I described a minute ago occur amongst all institutions or all nations. Now, a quick scan. For instance, policy clarity on distance education or technology-mediated education is not forthcoming in many South Asian nations, perhaps with the exception of India, which is making a very strong commitment to distance education. While India is clearly committed to distance education and its expansion, its institutions have, on the other hand, difficulty in reaching out, especially to extremely marginalized groups, and that's a constant cry in that nation. The access and ability to apply new and emerging technologies, both at the provider end as well as the user end, challenges almost all of the countries in South Asia and to a certain extent Southeast Asia, except Malaysia and Singapore. This may be on the whole a reflection of both the state of technology development, technical support for that technology, and infrastructure. Costs are also high and services inadequate. Instructional design skills and pedagogic quality have perhaps been a problem in China, considering that their traditions of teaching does not sit comfortably with theories of constructivism, which commonly drive many distance education practices. Leadership, management, ineffectiveness, political interference, corruption, insufficient financial resources, as well as unhealthy competition and poor governance have been a challenge in India and in Sri Lanka. The disruptive impact of the recently resolved civil war has been an impediment to orderly progress. How am I for time? Okay, good, thanks. Despite these difficulties and challenges, I think it is to the credit of those early pioneers, promoters, and academic leaders who clearly witnessed the convergence of the three elements of need, opportunity, and economies to enhance access and perhaps even address in a modest way equity issues. And they seem to have grabbed it with vigor and opportunity to start a movement that has not stopped growing since the early 70s. In reflecting on the relative successes of open distance learning in Asia, it is possible to list out some strategies that these early pioneers adopted And as this community that you are such active participants are, explores ways and means to establish a level of sustainability for your innovation, for our innovation, to perpetuate itself, certain elements that were adopted earlier might have a value, and I think it's worth thinking about in the context of developing economies, certainly in the context of Asia and its transition economies. Number one, advocacy and awareness raising is absolutely critical for any such ideas and ideologies to spread. Two, participation and ownership. And hence my suggestion may be open distance teaching institutions would be a lot more receptive to own open educational resources than, say, a traditional university, especially when it means giving credits to courses or programs that the ordinary learner accesses through the web. Capacity building and training. Now, training all stakeholders, certainly training institutions, perhaps training even students, to efficiently use the resources has been a help for us in terms of distance learning. Will it be a help in this context? Technology. Now, it's mind-boggling as to what is coming out almost every other day. What is good? What is bad? What is useful? What is expensive? What takes a long time to service? What takes a longer time to learn how to use, like my PowerPoint experience. Now, choice has to be made on a number of issues, and to make choice, we need to have knowledge. Is that there as comprehensively as it should be? Talking to a number of vice chancellors of that 60 or among the 60 or 50 or 60,000 institutions, I wonder. Government policies. Development projects should be aligned with local government policies, and I think it's useful to try and take open educational resources as a policy issue to governments in Asia. And certainly, what are the financial consequences of it? And what can we do to reform policy towards supporting this innovation? Management and organization to use such a wonderful resource, as well as the resource's own ability to recognize and be sensitive to social, gender, and cultural issues, domination by one culture or another, domination by one gender or another, would have disruptive and even negative impact on this valuable facility. And of course, external political and economic factors do have a input. Now, these are things that I say in the first person because I just mentioned I'm involved in it for the last 30 or 35 years, had to confront. And I think if we are going to take open educational resources further, certainly in Asia, that movement has to confront these issues. And to build sustainability, they are important pillars. I think development theorists amongst you will almost immediately recognize this. Now, Asians have, in the open distance teaching systems, always used technologies. The earlier technologies have been mostly analog, print, radio, broadcast. Even today, India has got a dedicated satellite to education, a number of, my system, I knew this was going to happen. Can you give me 1 minute while I fix it, Chairman? I pray to the gods. This has been happening since about 4 o'clock this morning. Right. Eric Duval. Oh, come on. I think I'm going to go into an Apple, seeing how well it performs this last few days. But I don't like the new Steve Jobs. Yes. I think it's probably more. I would like to do that. I mean, I'll give this one more shot. I think I'll give this one more shot and see. Maybe is that the reason why it shut off? Oh, thank God, my computer's okay. Okay, Mr. Gates, back to you. Now, the advent of the internet and the transformation of information into digital formats does make it now possible to overcome many of the earlier limitations. So distance educators are beginning to use stuff from Wiki and other resources. There are also experiments that are going on in terms of podcasting, mobile phones, and the like. Now, this availability of the new technologies has created a different kind of interest in terms of provision, e-learning, which I raised earlier. Now, countries such as South Korea and Singapore are fairly well advanced. In fact, many of them, I would say South Korea is well ahead of the world in pursuing this potential, while many others in China, Thailand, Philippines are trialing, and Cambodia, Vietnam, Laos, Malaysia are also experimenting. Now, one of the things that we need to remind ourselves in this context is that there are three factors I think Asians need to recognize that requires their attention if they're looking at e-learning and the technology being the major driver. Now, I suspect this applies to those wishing to look at open educational resources as well. Now, the three things are the nation's digital infrastructure with regards to internet use, penetration, e-readiness, and e-learning. Now, despite enormous efforts and investment into IT infrastructure, the digital divide is still an issue of concern in many transition economies in Asia, Cambodia, Laos, to a certain extent Vietnam, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. Now, I said Vietnam. In the last 3 years, the access to internet, the use of internet has multiplied 11,000, no, I think it's 1,100%. It's in that region, not 11,000. Now, extremely good. But go a few miles away from, a few hundred kilometers away from Hanoi. It ain't there. Malaysia, same thing. Indonesia, even worse. So we do have this problem. So penetration may not be the only asset that you can use to measure whether one could actually look into using e-learning or virtual learning. The other factor, which is more important, is whether a country is ready for e-learning, the e-readiness and e-learning readiness. Some time ago, I think it was the Economic Intelligence Unit that used four measures to to look at whether these two readiness is there in about 70 nations and rank them accordingly. Now, the 4 things are connectivity, especially broadband, capabilities, that is the ability to design, deliver, and at the same time for users to learn through the internet, content development, and a culture to promote. Among the 70, only 3 Asian nations were in the top 20: Korea, Singapore, and Japan. All others were not in the top 30, 35. Then you get stragglers like Malaysia and Thailand and India towards the bottom, despite its millions of engineers. Therefore, these 3 factors apply, I think, also to the wider use of open educational resources. Well, OER in Asia is certainly happening, and I think one could either thank or damn MIT for this presence. I like to say thank, simply because it has caught the imagination of people, and which is a very, very valuable thing. But it is, looking and observing at a few experiences, it has also captured them within the context of a cause. Well, we talk about open educational resources. Try remixing and repurposing a course from MIT. Try doing it in Thailand. In there. And yet, many of the practices we see today happening in China, in Taiwan, and where else? Korea, are very similar to what the MIT OCW is. So it's a very overpowering influence. Perhaps only MIT can bring that kind of overpowering influence. In terms of advocacy, it's a great tool. In terms of then turning that advocacy into something very practical at the level of an Asian university, including an open university, it's going to be challenging. Let me just describe 3 countries. India. India talks about a national consensus to improve quality and benefit from new markets. And the Knowledge Commission, which last year's keynote speaker at ICD, Senior Moments, Petroda, chaired that commission. And they had a whole series of capacity building activities as part of the commission's work. In the meantime, there are 3 facilities that are happening. The National Open University, IGNOU, has put all its 1,500 courses onto what they call their version of an open educational resources. NPTEL, which is the National Program for Educational Technology and Learning, which is promoted by a consortium of Indian Institute of Technologies, have video lectures mounted on the YouTube. And then you have the Bombay Institute of Technology, which has got a repository of animations, which is also openly available. The last, perhaps, you can pick and choose and use it for your purpose. The earlier 2, it'll be very, very difficult to unbundle that course and then apply it, say, in Malaysia. I've tried doing it in a small way in the small university that I come from, and academics simply give up. But not just because of the accent, but more than that. Okay. Now, a video lecture is a video lecture, and the way it's captured, you cannot separate what they're doing from what we wish to do. So that's there. The study in Taiwan, a consortium of about 10 universities, are part of the part of the OCW consortium in Taiwan. They are mostly, again, classroom lectures captured on video format and made available. Now, if you are learning for enrichment, I think it's exciting to listen to some wonderful professors talk. But if you're learning for a purpose and a credit, then it becomes a little bit of a challenge. And if you're a user who wishes to take that and break it into bits, and use it as part of your course, then the challenge is even greater. Now, similarly, I think in China, CORE, which is the Consortium of Open Resource Educational Resources, consortium of about 12 or 15 universities, sometimes it seems to be as though it is active. At other times, it's gone into sleep, the deep Beijing winter. So one is not sure, actually. I'm talking to somebody from the Open University of China. They said, well, maybe they're not as active as they claim to be. So I don't know. It's very difficult. Again, it is an MIT analog, very much. And two individuals especially fascinate me as benefactors. There is a fellow called Lucifer Chu in Taiwan, and and it says open source publishing. Now he is pumping his private money into promoting open educational resources. Lucifer, I think, is a very interesting person to meet. And maybe you should have him as a keynote speaker than somebody who's so new to open educational resources to inspire you. But I think translating and making available those wonderful courses from Cambridge is a way of enriching. I mean, but not all Taiwanese are Bill Gates who can actually take up a quantum mechanics course or whatever and say, hey, that's a great one. Anyway, of the Chinese attempt, the thing that I like most, and I'm not prejudiced, is the one that's being made available by the Open University of Hong Kong. Have a visit to their open learning platform, and you'll see an open educational resource that's available. It's actually almost granular. You can take it and use it. Podcast is an iTunes. I'm not surprised that they're doing it, because right from the beginning, right from the founding day of that university, it was our intention to make all of our courses available in all public libraries for free use. Other than if they want to use it for a commercial purpose, then we had third-party copyright, and that time we didn't have Creative Commons arrangement. So I think that may be the way. If I were to advocate OER, I say, now that's the way I would want to see things happening in Asia. Now, it's this 5 more minutes. I think I'll do it. It's this rather complex situation that we call Asia that I encourage the International Development Research Center of Canada to support a research project on open educational resources. And I have the good fortune of leading this particular group of investigators who are coming from Korea, Japan, Hong Kong, Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand. And our mission is or our investigation is to do a few things. First of all, the bigger research question. How best can the newer technologies and innovations be applied to design, develop, and check curriculum at the same time to review methods of assessment as well as evaluation? The second one, to what extent should OER be embedded into current open university environments? Now, that's a bigger canvas. Now, we then split it into about 6 objectives. First, we know there are open educational resources out there. And maybe there's even a demand for this. Can we establish the demand? We also want to find out how this is being used. There may be millions of bits and bytes that are put there on the screen as OER. Who is using them? I don't know. Despite all the literature search in Asia, I couldn't pinpoint one finding that says these are the people who are using it in an institutional sense. There are individuals, and that's difficult. I mean, when you have almost a third of humanity in Asia, it's going to be difficult to search for the group of people who are using it for enrichment. But looking at institutions, I had some problems. Then we also want to know what are the capacities that are required, indigenous capacities, to design, develop, deliver, assess, and even offer credits to either a formal learner or an informal learner who's willing to sit for a challenge exam. How do you do this? Now, you want to stretch that string, open that envelope as wide as you can to really benefit from this wonderful opportunity to learn. We also thought it would be helpful the way OERs are being used. Not only the uses, but how is it being used in institutions especially. And along with this, at least in about 6 or 7 countries, examine the legal issues. What are the limitations? Indonesia, for example, doesn't quite have that Creative Commons facility. And Indonesia's Open University is dealing with nearly 600,000 students. So we thought it's worth looking at. And we also thought we'll take and put in place a study that will track the cost benefits of creating a course entirely made up of learning objects and made available as an open educational resource to the community. The place we're going to be doing it is in India, in Chennai. They run a course for something like 30,000 engineers in about 30,000 colleges of engineering on soft skills. Because for every 10 engineers they produce, 1 engineer probably is employable, the others can't be employed. Okay. Problem? The lack of all those soft skills. So this particular course is teaching soft skills. We thought, okay, turn this into an open educational resource, a course that's made up of granules. So engineering college 1 can use some, and engineering college 30,000 can use others. So we're looking at about 3 years in terms of tracking this and then probably describing it and sharing it with people like yourselves. That project is happening because the International Development Research Center very generously gave a grant that will allow us to do this. I'd like to thank you for hearing this neophyte talk about what you folks are so familiar and comfortable with. And I want to apologize if I've taken extra bit of time. And sorry for not following convention and using PowerPoint. Okay.
I think there's time for 2 questions, and then we have to go for coffee. I'd like to thank Rahim for his handicapped presentation. He was handicapped by the system support, which sometimes is the case, but he did very well. And who wants to ask him a question or make a remark?
Be kind to me.
Is there a mic? Yeah.
Not directly related to OER, but I'm wondering if the large demand that you were talking about in Asia in terms of student population or potential students and the lack of supply, if that supply was fulfilled by the current options that there are, what percentage of that, those numbers of students would the options be economically prohibitive? Are they included in those numbers, or are there?
No. They are not included in the numbers. And just an example, India in its next 5-year plan wishes to create close to 1,000 new universities. That's 200 a year. Okay. Now, they think this will be completely or mostly paid for by entrepreneurs. If I'm investing, I want to get my investment back in 3 years, 5 years. It's not going to be available to the marginalized groups that India has, and that's tons of them. Similarly, I think also China. So these two countries are going to be, in fact, the biggest drivers in terms of higher education demand. And I could almost hear institutions in Australia and maybe UK salivating at the thought. But I'm not sure it's affordable by the zillions.
Somebody else?
Fred, over here.
Well, first of all, I would like to thank you for the enlightening talk. And let's see, where do I start? It is a remark, not a question, and I'll try to make it as short as possible. There are people in Asia with the creativity to create the repurposed work built on OER, especially in places like Indonesia, where there are 20,000 islands or 24,000 islands, depending on what time of the day that you count. There is a problem with the building landlines, so they know that everything has to go mobile. So there is a project in Indonesia where they are repurposing all the open courseware materials from abroad to fit their level and their context and the language. And they're putting it on mobile platforms. The countries that you've mentioned for not having such a creative use of OER are the countries that have failed to encompass free and open software movement in the late 90s. Korea, Taiwan, and Japan. The three governments made pacts to bring more open software into the countries, and it totally failed. So it's not as grim. The picture does not look as grim as you would think it would be. I just wanted to tell you that there are some really outstanding people out there.
Yeah. Oh, don't misunderstand me. I don't think it's all totally negative. My beef would be, until we institutionalize at the highest policy level, those projects you talk about remain projects. You remove the carpet of external funding, you remove the project, and you remove a wonderful creative resource that you had built. And that's my beef.